Hey there, and welcome to another episode of Living in Lansing, Michigan, your resource for everything you need to know about buying a home, selling a home, or living in the greater Lansing area. I'm Brooks Warner, and your host and local real estate agent at Mitten Home Team at Keller Williams Realty. Today, I have a special guest coming in, a good friend of mine, Dave Williams, who is an estate planning attorney, and he is going to be sharing very important information about estate planning and everything that goes into it. Before we get started, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications to see future videos, because this is probably going to be a mini series with a couple different videos, as there is a lot to cover. This is a topic that's really hit me near and dear recently, as I've been dealing with it quite a bit, both personally and professionally, and there is a lot to know when it comes to estate planning. This is going to be a real hot topic over the next few years to a decade, as the baby boomers are continuing to age and leave their estates to their heirs. So let's go ahead and get started. Also, I almost forgot, if you have any questions related to this topic, go ahead and drop them in the comments. I'll make sure they get answered for you, or always feel free to email me, brooks@mittenhometeam.com. I answer questions like this all the time, and if I can't answer them, I'll get you in touch with David so he can help you out. Okay, I'm back with my second segment with my friend David Williams here, who is an estate planning attorney. And if you missed the first video, go back and watch it. We talked about probate and wills and what everyone needs to know about that. The video was running a little bit long, so now we're going to jump into segment 2, which is trust, which can be pretty complex. So let's start with just what is a trust, and then we can kind of go down the rabbit hole from there.
Okay. So what is a trust? A trust can be a number of things. Primarily, we use it as an estate planning tool.
Okay.
So there's other versions of a trust: wealth transfer, asset protection. But for most of us, it's an estate planning tool.
Okay. So the trust, I think, based off from our last video, will help circumvent having to go through probate. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that is. That's one of the primary benefits.
Okay. So what can go in a trust?
Almost anything.
Almost anything.
Yeah, not everything, but while you're alive, if you make a trust, we call it a living trust, because I made it when I'm alive.
Okay.
Right? So it's a living trust. When we do that for our clients, we want to make sure their trust owns their stuff. That's
Okay.
how the trust is going to work. So if you set up a trust and you put your house in it, the trust is going to say, now the Brooks Warner Trust owns his house. If Brooks passes away, the trust says the next person in charge is this person. They don't have to go to probate because the trust owns it, not Brooks.
Gotcha. And you just hit on something that I've actually dealt with professionally. Having a trust is one thing. Putting your things that you own in the trust is an entirely different thing. So I had to help a family, I don't know, a year or 2 years ago. They're like, oh, we have a trust. And the answer was, you do have a trust, but unfortunately you don't have any documents that are approved that your assets were put into the trust, so it's essentially worthless at that point in time, right? It's an entity that doesn't own anything if it has never put anything in it.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd go as far as saying worthless.
Okay.
It depends. Classic attorney answer, right?
Yeah.
It depends. But it could be. So when we do a trust, we're still going to do a will.
Okay.
So we talked about wills in the last segment. When we do a will, if you already have a trust, your will is going to say, take whatever I own in my name when I die and put it in my trust.
Gotcha.
So we don't want that to happen. We want your trust to own your stuff, because we already talked about wills go through probate.
Right.
So you would have to probate those, put them in the trust, and then your trustee would distribute them the way you said.
Gotcha. Okay.
Unnecessary steps.
Unnecessary steps. So best is to, I think it's called funding the trust, right?
Right.
Where you put your assets in the trust while you're
Yes.
still alive.
Yes.
Okay. So other pros and cons, other things you want to tell people about trust. What can they do with trust? What can't they do with trusts?
Well, there's a lot you can do with a trust.
Okay.
So, what we run into a lot of times is people with minor children.
Yeah.
Right? So you've got little kids and you say, I don't want them to get 100% of my assets when they're 18. So if we had a will and it just said, give everything to my children outright, that means they would have to get a conservator over them, another court process to manage their money until they're 18. But when they're 18, here's the money, hope you don't waste it. A trust can do a little bit more. We can say, I want my kids to inherit, but trustee, this person that I've named that I trust, I want you to look over that for them and distribute to them when they hit certain ages or benchmarks that you can dictate in the trust.
Okay. So that's definitely a pro. What's the cons to a trust?
You know, the cons would be it's a little bit more expense in setting it up.
Okay.
There's more paperwork, more time involved. And then also, if you're setting up a trust, you really want to see it through and make sure you're putting your stuff in the trust.
Okay.
So funding it. I'd call it after my meeting with my clients, you've got a little bit of homework to do.
Yeah.
And we're big on trying to help with that. We automatically will do a deed, that kind of stuff. But we want to make sure your assets make their way into the trust so they are going to effectively avoid probate and carry out your wishes.
Okay, so I had a couple thoughts while you were saying that. One was the expense, which I'm sure we'll get another attorney answer, but it depends on how complex it is, right?
Right.
Which is fair. But in general, people are probably going to hear that and say, okay, what are we looking at? Like, how is it? $2,000? Is it $20,000? Is it, what's it cost to get quality trust set up for an average person that has average amount of assets, we'll say?
Yeah. So I think, again, you're right. It does depend, and it's going to depend on a couple things. You know, first of all, the person, you know, how complex are the plans you want to make. Another thing it's going to depend on is the attorney. You know, I don't know what other attorneys charge, but I have heard, you know, there's typical ranges. Usually, you know, a single person is going to be less than a married couple.
Okay.
But for a single person, probably in the $2,800 to $3,200 range.
Okay.
For a married couple, it's not double. Usually, it's probably going to be in the $3,500 to $4,000 range.
Okay. Another thing that I've ran into personally from a real estate agent standpoint is people will have a trust. They will put their house in a trust. They don't have a bank account for their trust. They pass away, heirs are selling the property that's in a trust. Title company will only issue a check to the trust because that's who's legally owning it. It's kind of a complex statement I just said there, but how do we go about making that process easier? Because I've seen it be very frustrating for clients in the past.
Right. Well, and we're seeing that more and more. More and more banks are not putting existing accounts in the trust. So it used to be, if we set up a trust for a client, we could send a letter to the bank and say, please update the account to say it's owned by the trust. We're seeing more, not all of them, more of them are starting to say, well, we're going to close that account and open a new one in the name of the trust, which can be a pain because so many people have direct deposit, Social Security direct deposit, bill pays. So a lot of times we'll just name the trust as beneficiary of the account, which works, voids probate, the trust owns the assets. But if your home is in the trust and you go to sell it, now the title company is going to give a check in the name of the trust, so you need an account. So the simple thing is the clients can go open an account in the trust. A lot of times what we're doing, and it's very situation dependent, but we might do a ladybird deed to the trust, which avoids that situation.
So if it's ladybird to the trust, I pass away, my house goes in the trust, the kids have to sell it, the title company's still going to cut a check to the trust.
But the kids are going to have to open up an account in the trust anyway.
Gotcha. So what's the best case scenario? The person who set up the trust creates a second bank account that is for the trust and utilizes it for certain things while they operate their primary bank account for their direct deposits and stuff like that with the trust as a beneficiary? Like, what's the...
Yeah, my first choice, this is what I always tell people, my first choice is that you put your account in the trust. Okay, so you're...
right now, today, while I'm living and working, my bank account is actually in my trust, not in my personal name.
Right, that's my first choice.
Okay.
Very close second choice would be name the trust as the beneficiary.
Okay.
And then in your hypothetical, or not so hypothetical because you've seen it, client selling his house and doesn't have an account in the name of the trust, it's very easy to go open a trust account in the bank.
And I think another thing that I've seen, and it's not even when people pass away, it's, oh, I've put my house in the trust to prepare for my estate, and then I need to sell it for some reason, but I don't have a trust bank account, and then that kind of gets a little bit messy too.
Right. It does. It can be very simple. Sometimes people get overwhelmed with things that we deal with every day, but it's not something that everybody is familiar with. It's not that hard to go to the bank and open a trust account. So a lot of people will just go to their regular bank and say, I'm getting a check in the name of my trust. Will you open up an account for me? And then as soon as I get it open, we'll move it over.
Yeah. Okay. So it's not that big of a deal. It's just essentially one more hoop to jump through.
It's one more hoop.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that hoop can be avoided if we use a ladybird deed.
Okay. So that's another. If you didn't watch video 1, ladybird deeds were discussed in the first video. So go back and watch that. And David does a great job explaining how ladybird deeds can be a great tool for people. Okay. Let's talk a little more about trust. What else would you want someone to know if they have done absolutely nothing and they're trying to make a decision about what to do? What do they need to know about trusts?
Well, trust can do a lot. So, in the first video we talked about everybody's got an estate plan. It's what Michigan law says it is, unless you've made one.
Okay.
And then Michigan law says you can change all of this if you make a will or if you make a trust. So in a lot of ways, the sky's the limit on what we can do.
Okay.
We want to be smart and not complicate things too much. But the other thing a trust can do is provide a lot of backup plans.
Okay.
So, I want everything to go to my kids, but if one of them is deceased, then I want his or her children to inherit and then hold it in trust for them, or you can put the terms on that, or I don't want grandkids to inherit, which is abnormal, but it does happen. So you can put a lot of backups in a trust.
Gotcha. So a lot more creativity, backups for more extensive planning for longer term versus the will is pretty straightforward, short, and done with.
Yeah, in a will we're on the topic of trust, you can put a trust in a will. So earlier we said a trust you make while you're alive is called a living trust.
Okay.
You can put a trust in your will, and it's called a testamentary trust.
Okay.
Which means it's in my last will and testament. It comes into effect when I die.
Okay.
So a will can still have the trust in it.
Okay.
I'm not a big fan of doing that because wills go through probate. The trust avoids probate. If we're going to draft all the trust terms now anyway,
might as well avoid probate.
We might as well avoid probate.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Any other pros or cons to a trust?
The pros: avoids probate, can carry out your wishes, less delay, with the probate, which can cause some delay.
Okay.
Con, it's a little more upfront cost and expense. There's also maybe a little bit of upkeep on it. So you're going to want to make sure, review it every few years, and you should review your will too and make sure these are still my wishes. With a trust, to show that you have authority as trustee to do certain things, like sell your house, you need a certificate of trust.
Yep.
And a lot of times a title company wants to see that be relatively recent, maybe in the last 6 months or so. If you made your trust 10 years ago and you go to sell your house, they're going to need a new certificate of trust.
Yeah.
Pretty simple to do, but it is another step, and it's a pretty small step. It's not a big issue.
Okay. All right, well, I think that pretty much covers everything about trust. We do have a couple other topics that David's going to help me with. So remember, like, subscribe, turn on your notifications so you see the future videos. Also, if you have any questions, drop them in the comments. I'll make sure that they get answered. If I can't answer it, I'll get you connected with David so he can answer your questions for you. Thanks so much for watching, and stay tuned for the next video.